You are smart kids and you are asking the right questions. You are saying what happens to the viruses and bacteria with all this warming and climate change and the floods and the droughts and the sea level rise. And you are right, of course. There can be more diseases, more vectors as we call them. They carry the pathogens, the viruses and the bacteria from person to person and animal to animal. So includes also things like ticks, mosquitoes and pollen. Why do pollen matter? Because many people are allergic to pollen, right? So here is a tick that is sucking blood, and here is an anthrax bacteria that can make you sick. So the last outbreak of anthrax in Russia had been in 1941. Well before your parents were born, maybe your grandpa was born. Anthrax is a pretty contagious disease, and if you are not careful, it can be fatal. It can kill you. And in 2016 the disease suddenly reappeared. Dozens of shepherds from the north of the country ended up in the hospital. A 12-year-old boy died. They had probably been infected by a bacteria in the thawing carcass of a reindeer and infected them with anthrax. The animal must have died of anthrax at least 75 years ago, and it just got exposed. And some of these bacteria and viruses are very smart. They can survive in a hibernation. They are not dead, they are just sitting there, and as soon as temperature warms up and they find some fluid like a human body, they can come alive and start reproducing and multiplying and growing in number again. So the animal must have died of anthrax a long time ago. Its dead body froze and the bacteria inside it ended up in a kind of stasis, a kind of a, it just sleeps there and it's not dead, it's not awake. Now that the ground in that area is thawing, the bacteria are coming back to life. Anthrax bacteria will wake up in other places in the in northern Russia as well. But anthrax is probably the only disease that can last for such a long time in ice. Luckily, there is a vaccine that helps people against anthrax, so there is no need to be afraid of it right now. So let's relax about anthrax. But what you need to be afraid of though is ticks, little spider-like creature that can transmit Lyme disease, which can affect your joints and leave you exasperated and weak and crying. You might already know what that is, but did you know that ticks are over the moon about global warming because they love warm temperatures? Just think about it. They love heat and humidity. Check. They are active when it's warmer than 5 degrees. Check. And they like to hitch a ride on people who go into forests, countrysides and dunes. They are everywhere, and if you walk around without shoes and full sleeve shirts and a hat and a cover, they'll jump on you and sit there quietly and bite you and transfer the Lyme disease to you. Who are in those places when it's warm? Check. So it's no wonder that there are more and more ticks, that the ticks are active for longer, and that your camp counselor keeps nagging you about checking for ticks when you go out and come back after a day or during part of the day. Mosquitoes also love climate change. Take the malaria mosquito. It's the most dangerous creature on the planet. Every year 500,000 people die of this disease because it transmits very easily. That mosquito carries this plasmodium with it. That's a bit more than 150,000 people a year who are killed by venomous snakes. Malaria mosquitoes love heat and humidity also. So the future is looking good for ticks and malaria and mosquitoes. To the north and south of the tropics, the climate is becoming better and better for mosquitoes. So warm temperatures are spreading to higher latitudes, higher in the mountains. In the mountains where it was once too cold for them, now are becoming welcoming to mosquitoes. This will result in a lot more victims, particularly in Africa, where people do not have proper housing, proper clothing, and it's hot and humid all the time, and now it's getting hotter and humider. So now you have pollen, and here malaria mosquito, Asian bush mosquito, the tiger mosquito. You have heard of mosquito types, I'm sure. In wealthy regions, people don't need to be so afraid of malaria. Even if they get tropical conditions, there are fewer dirty pools of water for the mosquitoes to breed, and there is much more money to combat malaria and other things. And when they travel to tropical countries, they're made to take vaccines and malarium and yellow fever vaccine and so on. But the cousins and various other relatives of the mosquitoes are on the move as well. Tiger mosquito and the Asian bush mosquito can transmit diseases such as dengue fever, which also can kill if you're not careful. They hitch a ride to other countries in bamboos that are being taken by ship and car tires that have been a bit of water left in them, or they fly on planes with people, and in order to transmit a disease they must be able to reproduce and be infected with the disease. That chance is still very small, but it only keeps increasing. One really obvious sign of climate change is all the sniffing and sneezing around you. Maybe you join in like I do. I had pollen allergy in the US when I lived there. In the past I used to have hay fever, it's called, for a couple of weeks in May, when everything was in bloom because sun came up, spring arrived, beautiful flowers and lots of pollen. In the US, in some parts, the car can be covered with yellow and green pollen during spring. But now I sometimes find myself sneezing from March to October because it's warm and many plants are blooming. That's because the warm weather is making some plants flower much earlier, and when one has finished flowering, other starts tossing its pollen into the air, and there I am breathing it in and sneezing, and eyes are burning. Because of the higher temperatures, plants also seem to be spreading much more pollen, producing much more pollen. They respond to temperature and precipitation and rainfall. And then there are all those plants from the south which used to think it was too cold there, but now they are very happy and dancing away. So if someone says climate change is nonsense, then I just say, choo, sneeze. Kids, not fun when you have to sneeze 100 times a day and the eyes are watering and burning and you are constantly blowing your nose and you can hardly breathe and hardly sleep, and you cannot go outside and run around and enjoy life like everybody else is doing. So we'll come back and talk about spoil sports. What do we mean by that? We'll talk about it and what happens to humans. So it's not just climate change doing things to temperature and humidity and rainfall and crops and vegetation. It is also doing lots of things to us. And of course economists worry about whether you are working hard enough. So they say climate change is making people work less. They call it labor lost. Productivity goes down. You may not die, but you get sick and become unable to work, and that's called morbidity and so on. So you may be missing school because there is more allergy and mom says don't go outside, and you want to go outside and play, or even go to school because you don't want to stay inside, but then the pollen is just too miserable, and if you take an antihistamine it may make you sleepy, and so on and so forth. Okay, so climate change is not a joke at all. There are other details. Even if you're old and seemingly healthy, climate change can make you older. Pollution can kill you sooner. So it's not just warming, it's also what is called air quality. So it can make you sick because of pollution. And there is something called water quality. If there is drought and flood, then the water quality, the pathogens and the viruses in the water are increasing, and when there is a drought, people are congregating to a little water left somewhere and there is a snail in it and you get another type of disease. So you're always getting some disease or the other, and there's a case of how much worse it can get with warming and raining and not raining and winds, because there are some bacteria carried by winds like meningitis in Africa. I'm not trying to scare you, but I'm just saying be aware, be very aware of what's happening where you are and what's coming and what's going. Maybe it used to be cold and mosquitoes used to die in the winter, but now it's getting warmer and mosquitoes are there even in the winter, right? All these things are to worry about. Okay, see you in the next podcast on the spoil sport. Okay.